Roderick King, program number 44, Blue Mountain Pottery.
How do you do? Roderick King speaking and bringing you a short story of people, places, or things I meet in my trips around the province of Ontario. One of the oldest industries in the world is that of the art of making pottery. And on the shores of the blue waters of Georgian Bay, you'll find the Blue Mountain Pottery. And I came here to find out what it's all about, and here is Eunice Drake to tell us. Eunice?
Well, pottery is an old art, but ours, instead of being molded on a wheel, is done in molds. It's easier that way to get things in a uniform size.
How do you get the original?
First, the original piece is made on the wheel, and from that piece, a mold is made. From that mold is a master mold. And from the master mold, of course, you can make any number of molds.
It's rather unusual to find a pottery business right here in the Georgian Bay area, isn't it? How did it all start?
Well, it was a Czech boy that was skiing and found clay that looked very like what he had back home. And he experimented with it, and it turned out to be clay that could be used for pottery here in Canada. It started 9 years ago, and now we employ about 15 people altogether.
Well, Eunice, could we see some of this operation?
Yes, we can go right down to the mixers here, and we'll see it right from the start. That is one of the mixers running. It is the mixer that takes the air bubbles out of the clay. From this mixer, we put it in a small barrel run on a track above the molder's head. And from this other barrel, the molds are filled. They're filled up right to the top.
These are all these molds
All
I see
these molds along here, yes. The liquid is left in the mold for about an hour. Then, in that time, the clay solidifies around the edge of the mold with liquid still in the center. Now, in the hour's time, that piece is as thick as we want it, so the clay that is still in the inside is poured out again. And that leaves your hollow shell clinging to the inside of the mold.
Now, what happens then, Eunice?
Then those pieces are all left until 1 o'clock. This process is finished by 10 in the morning. The molds are taken apart and the pieces are very gently lifted out. They are still quite wet, as you can see these pieces on the boards now. The clay is brown, just looks like chocolate.
Where do we go from there?
And one of the boys puts it on racks to be covered with plastic, and they're left like that until the following day. Then the rough edges that you can see on these pieces has to be cut off. I think the best piece to show you is a swan. You can see all the rough marks on the swan. The wings are not cut out, so that all has to be done. They're all cut first, and then they're sponged with water, so all the marks are taken off them. There can't be any marks on a piece before it's fired. If there is, that mark will show through the finished glaze.
How do you fire them?
They're all electrically fired. We have 7 kilns altogether. First, the pieces are put in brown. They're fired until the temperature comes up to 12,000 degrees. Then the kilns are turned off and left to cool down. When they come out after that first firing, they are a red color, like these pieces you see, almost like an ordinary flower pot. Our glaze is put on after the first firing. The pieces are put in the kiln for the second firing, and they're fired at 2,000 degrees. When they come out, they are completely finished in our own distinctive colors, blue, green, brown, or black. Sometime the glaze runs too far, and it has to be ground off to make the piece level. Then it's shellacked with a clear shellac just to seal it where the glaze or mark was taken off.
Well, Eunice Drake, thank you for taking us through the Blue Mountain Pottery. This is Roderick King saying so long until our next short story of people, places, or things, and returning you to the studio.
Yeah, it was amazing. As I listened to it, I thought, yeah, that doesn't even sound like Mom's voice, but it was so many years ago that her voice, I guess, had changed some too. But yeah, it was great to hear it, for sure. My name's Cliff Drake, and I'm the youngest son of Eunice Drake. Who was Eunice Drake? She was our rock. We just lost her, so it's it's a sad time. Dad, he was a truck driver, and he was always away. And so Mom, she raised us, and yeah, we really looked up to her. Times were tough back then, yeah. There wasn't a lot of money, and yeah, they both had to work out. It was just a hobby farm that we had. We didn't work the land or anything. Well, Mom started working actually at the ski barn. She worked in the kitchen, and upstairs in the ski barn there were rooms, and she cleaned rooms as well. And then I guess when Jozo started the pottery, then that was moved into the basement of the barn, and Mom worked there. So that would be 1955 when she started with the pottery. She was what they called a cutter, where she trimmed after the clay came out of the molds, there was a seam, and she would cut all that seam off and rub it with a sponge and smooth it all and sand it, yeah. I guess she just learned it from Dennis, probably, because Dennis Tupy was working with her at the time.
Dennis Tupy was, he was an interesting man. He was very complex, but he was a simple man at the same time. He was very humble, kind, generous, adoring, an amazing human being. So I'm Sue Tupy, and I'm a painter. Well, he was the originator of Blue Mountain Pottery. He was born and raised on a farm with his parents and two brothers. He was the youngest brother.
Carved out of parts of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, Czechoslovakia was one of 9 new European nations created after the First World War.
He went to a ceramic school. It was a university, and he studied the craft intensively.
Well, it was, from my understanding, it was one of the preeminent academies for ceramic instruction. My name is Conrad Bernacki. I recently worked at the Royal Ontario Museum. You've made a model in clay, and you've shaped it, like plasticine, and how do you then transform that into thousands of vases that are going to be on store shelves? And so to do that involves mold making and casting. And so that was what he was extremely good at.
His forte was in the plaster department. Because nobody really wanted to do it, he decided, because it was the most difficult, that was the challenge for him. He was called up to war, and he was an artist and just didn't want to partake in it. So he ended up in Germany at a refugee camp, and he was there for a year, and was given 3 choices to 2 places in Canada and 1 in Australia, and he chose Duncan, Ontario as a general laborer.
Dennis Tupy came to Canada in 1951. It was the immigrant resettlement process after World War II, so you would have your passage paid for you if you agreed to do a year's worth of labor on a farm.
He was on a farm with a young couple and slept in the barn with the cow for a whole year. Fed himself with the milk of a cow that he slept with.
Well, there were a lot of skills in Czechoslovakia. Unfortunately, some of them were armaments, so pottery was more benign. And we ended up getting quite a few of them, partly because they knew that Jozo was from Czechoslovakia. He was actually from the Slovak part. My mother was Czech, and they brought their skills with them. My name is George Wider. I was president and then chairman of Blue Mountain Resort, and Blue Mountain was founded by my father in 1941.
So the story is that Jozo imitated a Canadian immigration officer and went to the farm and said, he's got to come with me. And so the farmer gave him up, and Jozo took him on as a new employee.
And gave him a job at Blue Mountain as a dishwasher in the ski barn. And that's where the journey of Blue Mountain Pottery began.
Jozo had been an immigrant himself. We homesteaded in British Columbia, and he was very sympathetic and supportive to these people. And he actually went over to Europe and helped with government programs to resettle refugees.
I think it really began when Jozo promoted him to clearing the brush on the hills. And he had found a stream at the O Hill.
Dennis is wearing his boots, and he notices that all this mud is sticking to his boots, and that the mud is very elastic and glue-like. So he said to Jozo, "This is good clay for making pottery."
And that's when he had decided that he could really do something. There was an abundance of it, and this was his, where he was meant to be. This was his destiny.
So Jozo, forever looking for new opportunities, hoping to make further money to finance his ski adventures, and of great importance too is keeping his employees that he had during the winter employed during the summertime.
So Jozo was quite willing to investigate, what Dad's talent, ability was, and just asked him what he needed. And money was tight for everybody at that time, so you didn't get much. So Dad had asked for an electric drill, bag of plaster, and then just a few sort of various small tools. And then people, once it got started, and Dad made a few bits of equipment, primarily making a wheel so that he can create some sort of shape, form, to just get going. People were then offering old washing machines and, tubs and so on, and that's kind of how it began, right in the ski barn.
And he and Tupi began experimenting with clay pots in the basement of the ski lodge. Initially, it was a very tiny operation. There were arts and craft courses with guests, and that was the focus at first. But then they began commercial production.
So that's how the pottery started. And so purely by happenstance, purely by trickery, purely by chance, purely by two amazing people that happened to get together here in Craigleith.
Mike Jurok was also Czech, and he illustrates the connection between the resort and the pottery, because he was employed as a pottery maker and a ski instructor at the same time. So when somebody came in for a ski lesson, he would get out of his pottery coveralls and go out to the hill to conduct the lesson.
Yeah, he was Mike Sr. and born in Czechoslovakia, in Prague, Czechoslovakia. Well, I'm Michael Jurok, and I'm a millwright. During the war, he was a POW when the Germans invaded Czechoslovakia, and he was in jail for a couple of years until the Allies came and liberated. After that, he went to France, where he was a chef for a little while in Paris, and then returned home to Prague to find it occupied by the Soviet Union.
Ever since the end of World War II, Russia's interest in Czechoslovakia had increased steadily, following a pattern all too familiar to the peoples of Eastern Europe.
And being the type of fellow he was, he apparently publicly denounced the Soviet government and was forced to flee the country. And he arrived by boat in Montreal with $5 in his pocket and a duffel bag. And his first job was vaccinating chickens. And he came up to Blue Mountain skiing. He had heard there was a new resort, and that's when he met Jozo Wider. And they became friends. And there was a lodge up here at the time beside what is now the North Chair. And it was a Blue Mountain Lodge, it was called. And it had several rooms and bar and dining room and everything like that. And Jozo persuaded Dad to come up and run it for him, and which he did, and he moved us up here. He built a house at the base of the North Chair, and I think I was about 1.5 years old at the time. With the Blue Mountain Resort going, and Jozo being the entrepreneur that he was, he started a ski school. And my father had quite an extensive skiing background as well, cross country and downhill. And so Jozo used to phone down to Dad and say, "We got a lesson, come on up." And Dad would change into his ski clothes and run up to Blue Mountain and teach a lesson. So he was Blue Mountain Resort's first ski instructor. When he was working in the lodge, okay, in the meantime, Jozo started the Blue Mountain Pottery and invited Dad to work down there. And he, I believe, vested his interest in the lodge, sold it off. And then my father went to work for him full time.
The driving force was Jozo. He was a terrific entrepreneur, full of energy, enthusiasm, imagination. He read books on the pottery at night to learn the technical parts of the operation, and he ran the resort during the day. So it was a sideline, but became increasingly important and successful.
Well, it was definitely a partnership. I can't really sort of define exactly how to break that down. They were very good friends, and they needed each other, you know. Jozo had the means to, you know, bring in all that Dad needed to produce all the work. In fact, I think Jozo had even invited him to live in their home for a period of time. And they enjoyed one another's company. In fact, they had traveled together extensively. They had gone skiing in Colorado, and apparently one of the stories is they were in an avalanche together and they both escaped. So, and if you can imagine, on those wooden skis, they must have been going pretty fast.
To a great degree, he was self-taught. On our shelves in the house that he built that I live in now, there were shelves full of technical books on pottery, glazing, chemistry. He corresponded with researchers. So he really, he was a hands-on businessman and really got pretty deeply into the technical side of it. But Tupi actually had the experience, Dennis Tupi, and he played a key role.
It took Dad quite some time to sort of figure it all out, as you can very well imagine. I mean, starting from nothing to just processing the clay, which is quite an arduous deal in itself.
People liked the fact that it was made from local clay. The clay was drawn from Blue Mountain, the blue clay, and it was mingled with red clay that was trucked here from the Caledon, Orangeville area.
Where they got the clay from was from the Niagara Escarpment and from clay pits. So you go dig it out, right? Where do potters get clay from? Well, they order it from a pottery supply company, and they usually don't look for the clay in order to start from square one. Getting two sources of clay and experimenting, and then realizing that you needed these two to work together to make a clay that would stay together when it's fired and accept the glaze and turn out really well is beyond belief, because this is not industrialized raw materials. This is going and digging it yourself.
So there's a red clay and there's a, well, it's a green, it looks green, but it's actually a white body, it turns white. But in combination together, 50-50, it's the perfect clay body for pouring molds, pouring into molds.
It was basically a handicraft type of thing that ended up evolving into a major company. But first of all, they were just making stuff by hand, and it didn't go very well at first because clay needs to be aged usually for a year to 2 years before you can make anything out of it. So their first year of production was minimal simply because a lot of the clay wasn't suitable for it. Okay, my name is Bruce Dyer, and I've collected Blue Mountain pottery. Well, my mom had some back in the 1980s, and I started actively collecting about 1999 or so.
I was always curious about seeing Blue Mountain Pottery literature that said that they started in 1947. And I thought, I've never seen any pieces from the 40s or that look like they could have been from the 40s. And when I said to Dennis, when did you come to Canada? Well, I came to Canada in 1951. So there could be and have been no clay creation before Dennis's muddy boots. And so I was always curious about, was the company, just pushing back the date or who's going to prove that it's not 1947? So I thought, well, it probably is 1947, but why isn't there any documentation for it? So what was happening, I think, in that time period is, and what these plates show, is that they were importing American blanks. And what a blank is, for example, these are plate shapes, dinner plate shapes, and they are white clay, they are glazed, and they usually have a gold rim around them. And so in the past, people that decorated ceramics as a hobby would buy them, and they would paint on the surface of the glaze with their colors and then fire them. And that was a great hobby for Canadian and American women in particular from the 1870s to this very day, but mostly from the 1880s until the First World War, when supplies became more limited and women had less time to devote to things like that. So what happened here is that these shapes, mostly plates and vases, were imported and decorated in the ski barn.
Those blanks were Homer Laughlin ones, and we think that they were probably made by Georgian China in Collingwood. They would have brought them in from the States as Homer Laughlin ones to paint for themselves, and we think that while Blue Mountain was setting up around 1954-55, that since they needed their own clay to mature, they were getting some of these and they were painting them.
The vases that they decorated too, when you look at, they're decorated with floral designs, and the designs don't look Canadian, they don't look American, but they do look Eastern European like. And of course, Jozo being a Czech, and Dennis being from Czechoslovakia, and there being a relatively large Czech community here, he would hire those women who had some artistic talent in order to paint floral designs on these vases, and that's how they look as remarkable as they do.
Well, a lot of it in the beginning was quite experimental, trying to sort of create a brand, an identity of what Blue Mountain Pottery would be or look like. And so he had created many variations of glazes, and I remember him saying that when he had created the blue-green color, he opened up the kiln and he was quite disappointed with it. He didn't really even like it. So they had put it out on the shelves as something to just get rid of, and then found that people preferred that over anything else that he had created. So that was the beginning of the color of the brand Blue Mountain Pottery.
No other company that I know of in production pottery has ever done glazing like Blue Mountain Pottery has, and it is totally unique for production pottery, and it is a two-step process. There are no sprayers for the glazes. What you do first is that you paint on a white color where you want the highlights, and then you dip the piece into the dark colored glaze. And what happens during the firing is that these two colors blend together and create the streaky look. The glazes, like the ceramic material that they dug out by hand, the glazes were also made by hand. So they weren't something that you ordered. So to make your clay in-house and to make your glaze in-house, that is nothing but world renown.
All that he needed was there. So we created a story, and people were intrigued by that, I believe. The process of it, you know, it was just innate to the area, and my dad was charming.
So you've got two very different materials here. You've got clay and glass, and you're going to heat them up and then you're going to cool them. Well, the odds are that the glaze is going to crack. It's going to craze unless you hit the magic expansion and contraction formula that allows that not to happen. And how these guys ever did that, considering the circumstances, the rudimentary circumstances they were working under, is amazing. And why no one else wants to do that, or no one else wanted to do that or copy it, was because it's too difficult to do.
And we were struggling financially and had to build our own kilns, which was quite onerous and rather dangerous. Even sometimes the bricks would melt down as a result of somebody leaving the kiln too long.
In fact, even some of the designs were sort of by chance too, you know. I mean, we were trying to create an economy of some sort, and, you know, so they were paying attention to what people were gravitating to in terms of design.
Put together any two identical shapes of Blue Mountain Pottery in the same color, and you look at them, they are not the same. You know, the physical dimensions might be the same, but the coloring is not. And that was what the attraction was for Blue Mountain Pottery, is that this glaze was so varied and amazing, and that no two pieces are alike.
They were making 100 pieces a day, I think, which isn't many. And that was when they were full tilt with all 7 people working there in their first year. By a decade or so later, they were turning out 1,750 pieces a day.
The pottery grew and grew, and it started in the basement of Blue Mountain for the arts and crafts courses, and then we were selling it and producing more. But each center became too small. We moved to a barn on our home farm, and then that was destroyed by an accident with a kiln. And we had to relocate to another building on Highway 26, 5 kilometers from the resort.
Dad became a bit of a tourist attraction, so Joseph thought it was a good idea to market it and just have him there doing what he did, you know, throwing pieces. He was a potter as well as a ceramist. And so that was a huge attraction.
I remember Blue Mountain Pottery from my childhood, because my parents had a cottage in Wasaga Beach, and so during my teen years, I spent every summer here, and we would go often to the Blue Mountain Pottery factory and watching the production and seeing how many people did how many different types of jobs and what the end product was. But I did have my most favorite piece of Blue Mountain Pottery picked out as soon as I saw it, and way before I could even afford one of them, and it was the what's called by collectors the angelfish. Then when I could afford it, I bought one, and then I bought 2, and I bought 3, and I bought 21, and I stopped at 21.
It's a fascinating thing, because anything to be collectible has to be A, findable, and B, affordable, at least in most pieces. It has to be available in a number of different shapes, a number of different colors, and it has to tweak some kind of heartstrings to be significant. People will remember, and a lot of the people who joined the club remember, I grew up with that sitting on the dining room table or on our, in our china cabinet. It was a prize for my parents.
The designer of the angelfish was Dennis Tupy, and why he designed it was because Jozo Wider came to him one day and said, "Dennis, make something big." So Jozo didn't have anything in particular in mind, but he knew that Dennis would, because Dennis had lots of ideas and was a great designer. And so Dennis came up with this design. I said because I had the opportunity of interviewing Dennis many times, I asked him, where did this idea come from? He said, "It came from my ghost." And I thought that was an unusual way to refer to an artist's creativity. It's a ghost. It's something in the ether. It's something around. I don't know what it is, and I don't know how it's making me do it, but it made me design this fish.
Jozo and Dad started kind of arguing a little, particularly with designs, and Dad had kind of had enough, and he sort of thought this was it for him. He's leaving.
Actually, Jozo was trying to become a little bit international, I think, with the pottery, and also learn more about ski areas. I think there was a gift show in Colorado, and then Jozo wanted to see a ski area in Nevada, and Dad didn't want any part of it. He wanted to get home to his wife and his son, and so they fought all through Colorado and got into Nevada, and Dad dumped them and took off back to Ontario. And Jozo, I don't know how he got home. Yeah, well, they wouldn't talk for a little while after that, but you know.
And there was one vase that he had designed, and he didn't want Jozo's input. And he said to Jozo, what do you think about this? And held it up to Jozo, and Jozo was going to change it. And Dad was so upset, he dropped it, and that was it. That was the end of their relationship. Dad had already devised a plan. Now, there was two houses on the mountain at that time. One was Jozo's and one was Dad's. And Dad's was just above the administration building on Happy Valley, and that's where I was born. By this time, there was a building that they used as a storage building, and by this time it was empty, and they had already moved the plant into Collingwood, and so that was vacant. And Dad had said to Jozo, approach him with a plan, and he wanted Jozo to lend him $10,000, and he would give him his house that he had at the mountain, and he would need a year to pay him back the $10,000, and if he couldn't pay him back the $10,000, that he would come back and forget about the whole thing. But by this time, Dad had already created new designs, had a new name. It was called Canadian Ceramic Craft.
Dennis left in 1960 to start his own pottery, and the reason that he gave for that is that he supposedly told Jozo that you're getting too big. The pottery is too big. You've got, in addition to the first factory, you've got this enormous facility on Pine Street. You've got, close to 100 people or more working for you. It's too big. It's not the kind of pottery that I envision working in. So he left.
And he set up his own company, got some former molds that Blue Mountain had used, created some of his own, and started making his own stuff, and used his unique flaming brown and rainbow glazes, as well as, of course, green and blue and so on and so forth. And his business just took off. So he was able to pay Jozo back, as well as making a profit.
And Dad just went to town on it. It was a success, and Jozo, they didn't speak for a whole year. That was the plan. Jozo came to the factory on the day, and Dad says, here's your money, and that was the end of their relationship.
Favorite memories were, I'm going to say it was nice to work as a family. My mother worked there, obviously my father, my brother and sister, all of us working together. I thought that was kind of cool, but it was harsh in some ways too, you know, because we'd be on each other because we spent a lot of time together too, right? I'm Rob Tupy. I'm a plant supervisor at Cabot Canada Limited in Sarnia, Ontario. Dennis Tupy was my father. Yes, I was the youngest son of 3. We didn't really have a lot of childhood time. There was always work. It was either we were cutting wood in the winter as well, or in the fall, my brother and I, and making the clay, or working Saturday and Sunday in the store because we needed the pottery. So my time was basically after the work was done, or after school I'd go there too to make a mix of clay too. I'd take my bike down and ride it there, and when I was just a kid, I'd make clay for them and then screen it, and then I'd go home again, and after my brother would hose me off with the hose outside because my mother would let me in the house. But yeah, those were the fond memories that I can remember with working as a family in that place.
I liked the smell of going into the factory. It had a certain smell. And opening up the kiln, when it was, when you got a fresh kiln there all fixed and it's all beautiful and shiny, you open that door and it's really something to see. Okay, my name's Jan Tupy. My dad was Dennis Tupy, and I'm a boilermaker now. There was real satisfaction of when I get a piece done and people looked at it and they said, wow, that's nice. Or that was not so good. You know, it made you feel really good that, wow, you did that. And I said, yeah.
Dad, as an artist, I always took it for granted, right? I couldn't do it. And I always just said, yeah, you can do that. You do this, you brag about it all the time. You tell me how good you are, blah, blah, blah. But I did appreciate it when I grew older. But when I was young like that, it was just something that he did.
I think it was my mom. It was a sculpture of her having a leg. I don't know how she did it, but she had her arms out and her leg kicking out, and he did it. It was big. It was probably, I don't know, about this wide and about this tall, and the mold was huge.
A ghost, our muse, yeah, that's what he would say, yes. And you know what, I mean, maybe there was something to it because all the pieces that he made, and I mean, he was a very humble man. And you know, when you've seen him make these things, like, where did that come from? How did you come up with these designs? Like, I mean, they were all different, but they were the same kind of, you know what I mean? It's like you could tell that it was made by the same person.
When Dennis Tupy left in 1960 to start his own pottery, he created quite a number of fantastical designs that were impractical in the sense that how did this shape of this animal leaping through the air or this double fish design could even survive the kiln, let alone survive packing and getting on a store shelf. So he, I think, was at his highest potential when he was at Canadian Ceramic Craft in terms of design. He was an ace designer and knew how to go about putting things together, and all that is because of his training and because of his initial experiences at Blue Mountain Pottery. So I'm sure Jozo was unhappy because of that, but because Dennis was such an important part and a designer for him. But that's what happened.
So we had other immigrants. They came from everywhere. Dominic Stanzioni from Italy, actually. And he was a very talented sculptor and designed a bust of Jozo that is in my living room now.
He had come here on the invitation of Jozo Reeder to come and work in his factory in Collingwood. There was pottery magazines, and in the back were ads, job ads. And I think my father saw an ad that Jozo had put out for a potter. My name is Michael Stanzioni, and Dominic Stanzioni was my father. Dominic was born in Salerno, Italy, which is south of Naples, in 1935, August. A post-war Italy. It's a lot of poverty, hardship. He was a very good craftsman. Some would say a great craftsman. He told me that he began, when he was at age 14, he began an apprenticeship with a local potter in the next town over from Salerno. He came to Canada in 1966.
What Blue Mountain Pottery did in 1966 was build the Pottery Observation Studio, which is this half-round building right next to their current factory then. And what you would do there is walk through the building and watch potters at work. Not the same type of pottery making that happened in the factory, but studio potters. So that was a potter working at a wheel, turning a vase or a similar shape, and then finishing it and glazing it and firing it. And you know, it was a semicircular building, and you'd look down onto the floor where the potters were making things. And I thought that was sort of magical.
Dominic made really nice looking stuff and designed the whole studio line of, I'm not sure how many pieces there were, but probably about 20 pieces in different colors, and they were all handmade, and Dominic could do them in the studio. So he did it in front of an audience. They had an auditorium there where people could sit and watch him creating the pieces, and then they would fire them, and at the end, people would buy stuff that he had made.
I would say that he liked to show people what he could do. And that was part of his first years, I think, was interacting with the people close up, and he liked circle, he liked people grouping around to see.
That helped bring people to the factories. They bought at a retail sector of the factory, and that was a good part of the business.
Within 10 years, they had 3 factories going in Collingwood instead of the little roadside stand. They wanted to keep high quality stuff all the time, but then they found out using the molds, we can create high quality all the time.
At different time periods, the primary gift, wedding gift, was either a Burke's silver platter or candlesticks, or chalet glass, the brightly colored glass that was made in Cornwall, or Blue Mountain Pottery. So those were the top 3. The glaze is so attractive, and none of the pieces were really that expensive. So it was a very affordable gift.
In fact, in the very first couple of years, they advertised that our items are available from $1 to $5. Later on, you get up to about $15 by the 1970s, but they were never really, really expensive.
Pottery actually was kind of out of left field because it was almost out of nothing. Just, although connected with the resort, it was really came out of the blue, sort of. But it was an extremely incredible and innovative thing, and it became an icon. But his first love was the resort, and he ended up selling the pottery in order to finance more development at the resort. So you could say that the pottery saved the resort because we were financially struggling at that time.
And I believe there was a time where there was a bit of a struggle with the mountain, and to quote Helen, which is Jozo's wife, she had said that Dennis had saved the hill because of the pottery aspect.
Jozo's main goal in coming to Collingwood was to set up his ski lodge and his ski business. All the other stuff was peripheral and to help him get through financially. So he had a farm, he sold eggs, he sold chickens, he sold apples, he sold pottery, you know, but all that was to get through and to do his real dream, which was develop the ski hills. And so that's why he would have sold the pottery.
The average run is 3/4 of a mile, and the vertical drop is 800 feet. But when all is said and done, this is where the real action is.
So in 1968, Jozo sold Blue Mountain Pottery to the International Silver Company, and you'd view that as like any large company buying out other companies. It doesn't really matter what they make, but they're making stuff in the housewares area that they see is profitable and has potential.
Some of those who had been involved in the pottery, like Mike Zabrock, started their own pottery operations.
As it coasted along, I mean, it remained quite popular, Blue Mountain Pottery. It just had an effect on certain people, and my dad being one of them, the way he felt he was being treated. And so he decided to venture off on his own.
So he started his own pottery business?
Yes, pine pottery.
Other potteries sprung up in this area, like Dennis leaving Blue Mountain Pottery, because they wanted to be their own creators and their own masters.
1971 he left. He wanted to be independent, I think. Independent. He even made his own clay, I know that. He had a truckload of dirt on the property, and he literally made his own press to filter the clay out from the stones.
It was, I guess, my age and the timing of the business, so that was became my summer job. And I helped in all facets of it. I learned how to make production molds. It's called master mold making.
Yeah, he was 24/7, 365. It was his whole life. And I would help him. Even as a little kid, I would sweep or do chores of some kind.
That's one thing to credit Jozo Wider with. He knew who to hire. He would end up having a number of people who would go on to form their own companies.
I was invited with a fellowship at Queen's University in 1979. It was the height of the Cold War.
The mid-70s. Soviet submarines and missiles were becoming more sophisticated.
And at that time, the Soviet Union had a very, very large submarine force. And so anti-submarine warfare was another critical need of the Pentagon.
The focus was on detecting submarines, Russian submarines in particular, in the waters as far as a couple of 100 kilometers away. My name is Aswar Prasad. By training, I'm what I call an industrial physicist or an applied physicist. I have my PhD from India in sensor technology. And so the piezoelectrics came in handy for that sort of work. And it was mainly a surveillance operation. And so my experience was used to build a new generation of sonobuoys that were being sought at that time.
At Blue Mountain Pottery's peak, and none of this happened during Jozo Wider's tenure, but afterwards, the goal of making the company continually successful was increasing the export market. And at its peak, 60% of its production was exported, mostly to the US, 40%, and about 20% to England. And it also went to another 80 different markets in the world, South America, South Africa.
Blue Mountain Pottery was at a turning point at that time. They were operating something like 42 kilns, 800 people working in 3 shifts. And if they wanted to expand any further, they needed to put a new transformer station because the hydro supply that they had at that point wasn't enough to power any more kilns.
And so you'd think that you're exporting Blue Mountain Pottery to England, which has the Staffordshire center of, at some points, world export production of earthenware and porcelain, and you're sending Canadian Blue Mountain Pottery to England, and they love it. Well, they love it for that one reason, is that it was affordable and that the glaze was amazing. So that was a big coup for Blue Mountain Pottery to get that market, as well as to be able to get the Asian market.
pottery caught on in the 1950s and 60s, the way it was marketed and so on. By the late 70s, they were selling practically everything they could make, hundreds of thousands of pieces per year. And sort of they saturated the market.
And they sought the advice of a consultant, and the consultant came back and said that they should not extend pottery work anymore, but should go in a new direction to make high technology ceramics. And subsequently they recommended my name, and I was hired in July. The company decided to make piezoelectric ceramics, which was my background for 10 years at that point.
The Canadian Pavilion at Disney's Epcot Center featured 2 items to show Canada: maple syrup and, obviously, Blue Mountain Pottery. So those were the 2 things. So to do that, that long ago now, said a lot about the importance and the recognition of Blue Mountain Pottery.
I started with Blue Mountain Pottery in 1983, and subsequently we ended up founding Sensor Technology in 1984. The whole industry in this area was burgeoning, and my job was twofold. One was to modernize the pottery, and the second one was to look after the new company that was getting into place. The pottery itself was never, we still used what they call autumn cones, which when you heat them, they bend to a certain angle, and the angle tells them whether the ceramic is fired or not. It was a visual judgment of an experienced potter. So what it meant was that in the middle of the night, one of the managers would come, open a little hole, and look at the cone and decide whether the pottery is fired or not. And then he would shut the kiln off. And the problem was that we had to find people to come in the middle of the night to do that, and we had 42 kilns firing every day. And my first job was to put in an automatic controller on that. So the whole idea was to take the influence of the people making judgments on this out. And so we were testing 2 kilns with electronic controllers, and people were worried that they were going to lose jobs even with electronic controllers at that time.
So the International Silver Company bought Blue Mountain Pottery in the 1960s. Robert Blair in 1971 was the general manager, and so he looked after the Blue Mountain Pottery.
In 1983, we closed the books with a total of about $25 million in sales. And then the owners that bought the company from Georgia Wider was Heritage Silversmiths of England. And if you recall the silver crisis in the early 80s that was started by Bunker Brothers in the US, the core asset for silversmiths was silver. And so when they had a cash crunch, they decided to unload non-core assets, and Blue Mountain Pottery was one of them.
Then a few years later, the company sold to Heritage Craftsmen. Bob Blair was still there. And then it was bought out by a number of private individuals, and Bob was a minority shareholder. He retired in 1982.
Mr. Blair got out in 1982. His successors were slightly different in terms of focus. For one thing, the man from Toronto who took over didn't believe in making a lot of the stuff that Blue Mountain had traditionally made, which knocked off an awful lot of its appeal. And he believed in making giant vases, some of which were about 3 feet tall and about 2 to 3 feet wide. I've seen some of those, and they tended to crack very easily. But he was trying to market those for hotels and for railroad stations and so on, to have them functional all across the country.
In '84, they short-shipped, and the reason they short-shipped is because they laid off all the artisans, the mold makers, the people who do the key elements of artistic work in the pottery. They were all laid off in the summer months. And we never did that under silversmiths. it always kept going. We finished our December. We came back in January in the new year, and we started producing parts because we knew that at the end of the year, in October, we start selling the product. So the production never really stopped in the company, but when the new owners came, having people meant more money and more line of credit, and they won't do that, so the company was forced to lay them off.
The one thing that Blue Mountain Pottery did in the mid-1980s was create a series of different large shapes, and they glazed them in plain colors. So it was plain black, plain pink, plain gray, because those were popular colors at that time period. And they wondered why they weren't selling very well. The line was called their Metropolis line. So you can see what they were thinking there by the name. And people didn't like it because it wasn't Blue Mountain Pottery.
And when the orders started coming in around July, August, and we tried to go back to the people and say, come back, and none of them came back. They all had so much of self-respect that they won't take this. And so at the end of the year, that was the reason that they short-shipped about 7 or 8 million.
The name on the bottom of it said, you know, BMP for Blue Mountain Pottery, but for most people that wasn't what Blue Mountain Pottery was about. And so they didn't buy it. A lot was invested in producing it, as well as other lines that they were trying in the mid-1980s in order to justifiably create more than a one-trick pony. So it is amazing how things go. You might be making a lot of different decisions in order to expand your production, but if by chance it doesn't work, well, you've missed the mark. And in this case, it was disastrous for Blue Mountain Pottery.
And unfortunately for the company, the people who bought the company did not have the financial strength to continue the operations. Blue Mountain was a giftware business. We built the inventory for 9 months in a year and sold it in the last 3 months. With a $25 million company, you build the inventory to the level of at least $12 to $13 million. And that means they needed a huge lines of credits to operate the company. And the companies that bought the pottery from Heritage Silversmiths did not have that strength. And as the result that 1984, we closed the books with about $6 million in unfilled orders, and that pretty much killed it. The customers never came back in '85, and essentially the company went into bankruptcy in 1985.
I had a family, I had a support, and when the pottery closed down, I had to find other work. My name is David Bennett, and I worked many years for Blue Mountain Pottery, about 17 years, off and on. And the last 11 years, I was the head mold maker and designer. I worked in the mold room and making molds and designing, and I didn't know everything that was going on in the pottery itself. I didn't know the financial situation. I didn't know a lot of different things that I didn't know.
The high-tech part of the business, it was incorporated as BM High-Tech Incorporated, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of Blue Mountain Pottery. They were just getting off the ground. We had a contract with the Air Force, United States Air Force, and we started delivering materials to them under the contract when this crisis hit us. The receivers, on the other hand, did not see this as a viable company, and they decided to close it. And at that point, it was me and Shashi, we decided to incorporate sensor technology and use sensor technology to acquire the assets of BM High-Tech Incorporated from pottery. And this happened, I would say, in May 1985.
And then when we decided that we are not going to take up another job but buy this company from Blue Mountain Pottery, I got involved. I said, whatever we need to do, we will do. So that was my thought process was basically we need to survive, and whatever it takes to survive, you learn what you have to do. My name is Shashi Prasad, and I have been part of Sensatech since 1985.
Shashi's background is, she's an economist by training.
Yeah,
she has a master's degree in economics. What happened when we took over the company was she jumped right in and took over the finances. And that sort of relieved me to focus on technology. And I can say that in 25 years, I never really bothered about the finances myself. And that's a big relief when you look at a company and organization.
We did have a lot of defense work. Even Canadian Space Agency, we had a contract. So doing the paperwork for a lot of organization, it wasn't easy. So basically, I took that job.
Mr. Blair came back in November of 1986 at the auction of all the items from the factory and bought back the equipment and molds for the most part. He'd been going to go in partnership with Dennis Tupy at Rainbow Ceramics, but when his former company came up, I think it was probably just too much for him to resist. So he went back and bought Blue Mountain and got out of the deal with Mr. Tupy for the other company.
Bob bought the company, the equipment and the supplies, and reopened in 1987.
Eventually, Bob Blair bought the name Blue Mountain Pottery, started it up again, and I went back to work with as soon as I knew he was opening up again.
There was about 20 or 25, I think, and then we would hire students for the store in the summertime because that was our busy time, and there'd be students in the back as well sometimes. My name is Leah McKean, and right now I'm retired, but when I worked at Blue Mountain Pottery, I worked in the office there. I trained the tour guides, and then in the off season I was the tour guide. Dave Bennett was the master molder at that time.
I never did a drawing of it, and I like to use my imagination. People don't use their imagination enough, and my wife says I have too much for my own good sometimes.
He was very talented in my view. Yeah, he was a bit shy at the time, so the tour would never go in there. But
think of an idea if Bob Blair would ask he wanted a horse. So I would, you can model with plasticine or clay. And then I had the horse made, and this was it here. And then he asked me, he said, I'd like to have a colt, a small colt beside it. So I added that to the mold, and so it was one of the first pieces I did.
Blue Mountain Pottery and Canadian Ceramic Craft both had very high standards of what they would produce. And they had very creative designs as well. Canadian Ceramic Craft was around becoming Rainbow Ceramics from 1960 until 1984, 1985. So CCC, Rainbow, had a very long run.
And Dad kind of wanted to retire. He was approached many times by people who wanted to buy it. And Dad was sort of, he was kind of finished, he just wanted to retire. But I had a little go at it for a few years. It was still called Rainbow Ceramics, and Dad didn't really want to be involved, but I still picked him up every day at home, and he lasted for a few hours before we got into an argument. And I take him home every day at noon. And that lasted for about 3 years. And there was a big shift in the dollar structure of the rental. It was just a huge jump, and I just thought it would have meant a whole reconfiguration of where the business needed to go, and I just wasn't prepared. I was a young person. I just had a new baby, and didn't want to do it. So that was sort of the end of it. That was the end of Rainbow Ceramics.
because of marketing and developing new product, he has to visit the customer to make sure that he's working with the engineering department and their department for designing a product and what will work. That means half of the month he was traveling. So I was on the floor. That was my job, to stay home and look after whatever is going on. Even I didn't understand a lot of technology. It was not my field, but still, at least I had a good relation with the employees. So he could be outside and of course look after a daughter, a dog and a cat. So that was my job.
Well, I didn't want to work there. It was really simple. As a kid, I was forced to be there. As a young child, there were no babysitters. I would nap under Dad's desk. I would play in the plant, and that was my young childhood. I'm Neeru Somayajla, and I'm the current president and CEO of Sensor Technology. I should have studied business. I didn't. I started in engineering and switched into geophysics, which is geology and physics, or rock acoustics, like I like to call it. And it was after my master's at U of T that I came back. Mom and Dad were getting ready to sell the business, and they needed somebody that they trusted to come in and help that transition period. And the deal fell through, so it was a perfect opportunity for me and two business partners to come in and buy the business from them and fully take over. That was about 10 years ago. So everything that we make is based off the early development of piezo ceramics, and those are high-tech pottery pieces used to send and receive signals underwater. And so the ceramic expands and it contracts and it makes those pressure waves underwater, and it does that to be able to create images, kind of like how ultrasound works to image, fetal monitoring and things like that. And so everything we make is related to acoustics of some kind, whether you're trying to communicate underwater, create underwater images, all different kinds of communication, and that's the basis of everything we do.
And the process itself is very economical, so it's very affordable technology, and that's why it's so popular. It's made of a chemical. The raw ingredients, the material itself that we make is called lead zirconate titanate. And as the name suggests, there are three materials, lead, zirconium, and titanium in that. We use them as oxides. There's nothing exotic about lead, zirconium, and titanium. They're all a part of pigments in pottery. Every pigment that you use in pottery probably has some lead in it, some zirconium in it, some titanium in it. So the raw materials themselves, you can say that, pottery is no different. They use them in glazes, making colors on the pottery. But the purity level we need is 99 plus. And that's why we go to other sources to get our raw materials, and we don't go to traditional pottery sources to make it. So it's a chemical that behaves like a ceramic. When you mix these chemicals together, and you form it into a shape and you fire it. At the end of it, it looks like a ceramic, it behaves like a ceramic, and if you drop it, it breaks. But if you apply a voltage, it'll bend and move and produce sound and do all these things, but it doesn't break.
And Blue Mountain had its run from 1955, basically, when they started making the stuff, up till 2000. Well, actually, the official date of closure is February 2005, but the store actually closed in 2004.
2004, when he announced that the company was closing for good.
I think there was a few things that contributed to it. One was that just about that time, the decor of homes was changing. And that was probably a big factor. And also, I think the overseas was falling off a bit. And so that was probably a sign of the times, I don't know.
The suggestions are that there was too much competition from Asia, and there was 9/11 and SARS, and that had impacts on the market. And so for these three reasons, sales were not as good as they needed to be, and so the company closed.
You know, Mr. Blair was in his 70s. Yeah, it was time for him to slow down. I was the second last employee to leave. Yeah.
So he shut the pottery down, and I had worked 17 years there, different molds, different pieces.
And actually, when Mr. Blair ended the company, he made sure that it could never be copied. You can't revive Blue Mountain Pottery because you can't get the molds, because Mr. Blair wanted to ensure the high quality of his work could never be copied by anybody inferior, so he had all the molds smashed.
And he came into my shop and he said, Dave, I want every mold, every master mold broken up, thrown into the dumpster.
All of them were gone. Nobody was allowed to take any of them. The molds that you're going to see are Canadian ceramic craft rainbow ceramics, which Dennis Tupy had made and came from his factory. And how I came upon them is they were in Dennis's basement. And these were the last remaining ones, so I said, well, I know a place where they can be stored. I thought something as important as that to Canadian heritage should not go under a sledgehammer. It's too special, and it reminds us of a time when this area, but also Canada, was well known to the world for its very unique qualities.
It was mass-produced so much that I think everybody had a little piece of Blue Mountain Pottery or Rainbow Ceramics or Canadian Ceramic Craft in their house.
You need to make it big, you need to make it full. It's got to be recognizable. And I remember when they made that piece, when he made that piece was actually a stamp, a Canadian stamp. At one time, that angelfish. It was a gold angelfish, and it was an actual stamp.
I think he did it with love too, right? He loved doing it, and
he enjoyed doing what he did. He was proud of his kids, his family, and what he accomplished. That's pretty much all I can say about that. Yeah.
His passion. I almost want to start crying. Yeah, he had a lot of it.
He would dip some paint and like draw on it. I remember sometimes he would say that's no good, and he would just kind of smash it and do another one.
I think the war taught him that life is too short and to make the best of it, and so he didn't, he was a pretty humble fellow like that.
If Jojo was still around, I think he would have probably pushed it. Jojo was very much respected in the company. Even when I was there, I came in '83. That was 12 years after Jojo passed away. I mean, everybody talked about how good the company was when Jojo was around, how progressive he was, and how, forward-looking he was,
He had a respect for people who worked there.
Actually, there was one thing that I wanted to say was about the Wider family, how great they were. And when my father passed away, George and Gord rented a plane to spread his ashes.
Over the area?
Blue Mountain.
I was happy to help Blue Mountain Pottery out. I was happy to get more experience modeling and mold making, and I never asked for anything more. And we had a lot of good people there, nice people working there.
To realize what it was and what it did and what it produced for homeowners in Canada and elsewhere in the world is something tremendous. And so for so many people to be familiar with what Blue Mountain Pottery is and to have liked it is quite an achievement.
No, he was very proud of what he had accomplished, and he owned it. It was his. Nobody could take that away from him. He was the master. Everybody knew it, and didn't matter. you know, that was the end of it.
Thank you for taking us through the Blue Mountain Pottery and showing us how Canadian industry and initiative are making a success of a very ancient but difficult art. This is Roderick King saying so long until our next short story of people, places, or things, and returning you to the studio.